For this video, we are going to look at how you can move these wonderful graphics that you created in Illustrator over to InDesign, and then just take a peek at some ways you can create levels of spacing and use your grids and guides to help you with that. So we're starting out here in Illustrator. So both InDesign and Illustrator are what is known as vector-based programs. So that's a shortcut of saying line, but what that means for you is that you can just copy and paste from Illustrator to InDesign, from InDesign to Illustrator. So here we are with our graph that we created. I'm going to select it. Notice I'm just using my selection tool, not my direct selection, and Command C or Edit Copy, and then I'll switch over to InDesign, and in InDesign, to paste it, I'm just going to Command V or Edit Paste. So then I have my graphic. It is all grouped together at this point. If I want to scale it down, I just use Shift and Command, scale that down appropriately. I can then ungroup this object by going to Object, Ungroup, or Shift Command G. And now each of them are separate items that I can then move, rearrange, and change. And you might have noticed that text did not come over very well. That is one caution I would give you when moving from Illustrator to InDesign, is that text doesn't always come over nicely. So in most cases it's best to go ahead and delete your text and restyle it here in InDesign using whatever styles you have. So you can edit and work with your graph, change it so it works with space better. We're going to come back and look at this design, but I wanted to show you from scratch how you would start out with creating your grids. So I'm going to create a new document in InDesign, and we'll assume that I'm creating a print document that is letter size with a regular portrait orientation, and here you can go in and change your margins if you would like. I'm going to leave these default. You can change your columns here, and so your columns is going to provide your basic grid system for your document. So I'm going to change that to 5 right now. So what a grid system means is you need to keep information within that grid. So an example, we'll just say that we're drawing a photo, and that photo is going to go from here to here. That's perfectly acceptable. We went from the edge of one grid to the edge of another grid. We're not concerned with the vertical spacing right now, just our horizontal spacing. However, if I drew this, that is not acceptable. That is ending up in the middle of my grid. That is not following the grid system. So with this, I would need to either extend it here or bring it over here. You want to extend it to the inside of your columns. Same thing is true for text. So if I had text in this area, that is perfectly acceptable. If I changed it to 2 columns, I violated my grid. 3 columns, that might work. That might be a little narrow. But if I extended it to there, I violated my column grid. So I'd want to go ahead and extend it to here, and then maybe break that into 2 columns. And that would be following the grid system. So far we've only been looking at our horizontal spacing. If I wanted to look at vertical spacing, which is really space between elements on my page, I would want to use the document grid. So to access that, I go to View, Grids and Guides, and I want to show my document grid. So each of these squares is the grid that I want to use, and I can establish what that looks like by going to InDesign, Preferences, and Grids. So usually what I like to do is say I want a grid line every 1 pica with 1 division. Right now my grid is behind my photo, but if I uncheck that, my grids will come on top of my photo, and that's pretty handy if I want to evaluate what they look like. I can also change the color of my grid if I'd like to do that. Okay, So each of these grids is a pica of space. And you can see that's over my photo as well. Generally speaking, one pica of space would be a traditional unit of separation. So I would want to pull this photo up here, pull this text up here, end right there, and end right there. And I've already got a pica here. So that would be traditional spacing. A more modern approach would be to use a half pica. So if I resize this to a half pica, I'd be about half there, half there. I would still want to keep a pica here. And so that's usually what gets people into some design trouble, is when you have different levels. Well, one way to use levels correctly is to think of levels of spacing as what their purpose is. So let's say that this text and this photo are related, but this does not relate to that. So I'm going to move this up a half a pica. Maybe I'm going to move this down a pica. So then I've created some levels of spacing. Let's hop over to this example and look at that in effect. So first I'm going to hit W so you can kind of see where my grids are. You'll notice that I have started this content partially into this column. I'm not full going over here. That is very purposeful. And I have used this entire space, so I have not violated my grid. That is because I'm using two picas as a way to separate information that is not linked. So this information is different than this information, so that's two picas. This is a completely separate piece of content, and so I've got about 3 picas of separation. But if you look in this area, I have a half a pica between the headline and the content, which is divided by 1 pica. So that's how you can use levels of space. Other little keyboard shortcuts to help you. W key reveals and hides, and then the command apostrophe will show your grid. And so right now my grid for this document is in the back, so I just want to bring that to the front, and there's my grid in front. So hopefully that gives you a little overview of how you can unite and divide using grids, how you can look at spacing both vertically and horizontally.